I'll call the City Council work session of November 4th, 2020 to order at 6 o'clock. Roll call, please.
Mayor Copeland.
Here.
Tom Baylor is absent. Kathy Sherman is absent. Jeff Guard. Jeff, are you on there? Melina Meyer is absent. Ann Schaefer.
Here.
David Allison.
Here.
David Gleason.
I'm here. Did we have Councilman Baylor, Sherman, or Guard? Did any of you just join?
This is Councilmember Guard. I'm back on my problems there.
Okay, thank you. That's a quorum of council. So the work session topic for this evening is the 2021 budget discussion. There's a handout here in the room anyway. And with that, I'll turn it over to Manager Howarth and recognize that Councilman Baylor just joined us.
Greetings, everyone. So we're round two with the budget for 2021. We have been working hard to make the refinements needed to present to you a budget that will work for 2021. This afternoon, Ken sent to you all a budget memo. Those of you on the line, do all of you have access to that? And if not, we'll make sure that it's we're reading it and it's clear what we're talking about. But hopefully, all of you got an email from Ken, and those folks in the room do have a handout that was just passed out. So I just want to double check and make sure that those of you online check your emails. If you don't have a budget memo, let me know. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Ken, who can guide you through where we are at this moment in time, what the issues are, and again, we're looking to you as council for some further clarification and direction on to how you want to proceed with the 2021 budget. We will then take that feedback and make whatever changes to the budget are necessary to present then a full budget with all detail at our next work session. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ken.
Thank you. As Helen mentioned, or as the city manager mentioned, this is the second round, second go through. First, last time we met, we talked about the revenue shortfall. This time we're adding the expenses to it, and it's there's a gap between the revenue and the expenses. As presented, we've actually presented two budgets. One we call the department head budget. This is the original one that we sent to or that the department heads sent to us, sort of as their wants and needs. And then as we delved into the revenue side, we saw the shortfall. We had to pivot and make a flat budget, as the city manager said at the last meeting, to take a lot of the things that were requested in the initial department head budget and get it into a more, I guess, a closer state to the revenue. The budget worksheet has last year's approved budget in column 1, and an aside, I've taken out the PERS relief from both the income and expense, because it is practically a flow through, and it's hard to manage. So with that said, it isn't the exact approved budget because that is missing from revenue and expense. Number 2 is the flat budget, which is described, as the second one. Once we receive the revenue, once we receive news or determine the revenue was going to be short, and that is considered, I guess, more of a basic bare bones budget. then 3, as mentioned, it was the initial one where we had a lot of other items and capital items, which can be, I guess, I'm jumping around, but can be seen on Exhibit 2. And Exhibit 2 is basically the difference between your flat budget and your department head budget. It isn't exactly the difference, but ostensibly it is. As I noted, the difference, were some of the differences that are included in the flat budget that is also on Exhibit 2 are the matching funds needed for the Hippie Cove, Second Street grant, and the Whiteshed Road with the biking path. Those are pretty much, those are needed to get the funds. They're almost, I don't know how to best describe it.
Non-negotiable.
Okay. Let's see. So the end up, the shortfall with the initial department head is at 1.9 million. A very large nut to crack, so to speak. And after going through and carving some things out, mostly capital items, the flat budget came in at a deficit of 1.3 million, which is still fairly large nut to crack. And you can see the numbers, the general fund, the revenue and the expenses by department for Exhibit 1. I've tried to give explanations on the large and or unusual variances. I haven't given explanations on every variance because it's self-explanatory, I guess, in materiality. Let's see, and then mentioning how to balance the budget this year. The components, the revenues can increase, the expenses can decrease, or the permanent fund can be accessed. I think in our last session, there was mention of possibly using the fund to aid in the reduction of the school debt funding. I think historically, because of for the surplus that was put in when we, I guess, the schools gave an higher or something. The history, I don't know that, but it was mentioned that that was a possibility, and we also mentioned that the CARES funding, because of the nature of they were paying the first responders as well as IMT, there was a type of surplus there, a sort of surplus that we can utilize. And then so that was sent out Friday, and the city manager and I were talking and going through how to best deal with the 1.3 or the 1.9 shortfall, and that is the memo that was sent out today and handed out here. To determine the numbers, the CARES funding, about 700 grand. That number we'll get a better number as we go forward as the projects and still process change orders and things like that. But we should get a better number on that. And then the delaying the capital items because there are some capital items on Exhibit 2 in the flat budget. So there's that. Another option is delaying and restructuring some new hires. Looking at what we're doing, if we could repurpose them or delay. Another item is not using the state lobbyist, $50,000. And then finally, a 2 or 5% reduction on non-personnel in the departments. That would yield a $30,000 to $80,000 reduction. And then those numbers will be determined by the department heads in terms of lowering. And again, not touching the salary, but all just the other personal services numbers. And then we have the final permanent fund allocation to, I guess, backstop and help fill them all.
And I just want to add that these are all possible solutions that you as council need to just give us direction as to how you want to proceed. None of them are easy. The last year we were faced with tax increases because we didn't have a whole lot of options on the table. We this year do have some possible solutions. It's a pretty big nut to crack, but it's doable. And I think that's the good news at this moment in time is that with some belt tightening and with some, deferrals at certain things, we can pretty much get through our operating budget without any increase in other revenue sources. But again, that just depends on how and if you want to tap the permanent fund, as was suggested at the last council meeting, and then some of the other recommendations. There may be some recommendations that you just don't feel are appropriate at this time, which might add back in. And we'll need to kind of reshuffle things. But this is just a first opportunity to look at what I would consider to be the low-hanging fruit, the things that we don't want to do without, but we potentially could. And there's some wiggle room here. So with that, I guess I would open it up to questions specific to either the budget as presented or any specific items around how we can fill the gap. Again, the gap was the result of two things. Number one, the state has declined to contribute any school bond debt reimbursement, which is to us a hit of around $450,000. And then this year, the raw fish tax that will be collected from 2020 catch will be 45% lower than the preceding 10-year averages, just because it was a poor return year. So we don't have an exact number, but we do have a percentage. So we extrapolated and came up with a $1 million plus budget deficit. So through no fault of our own, that's where we're starting, is with those unfortunate realities around the income side. So with that, I'll turn it over to Clay or whoever on council.
So, council, questions or comments? Councilman Gleason,
Using CARES Act, well, seems like a no-brainer.
can you pull your mic down just a bit?
Using that CARES Act funds.
Yeah, and just to be clear on that particular number, that number may go up. We're hopeful it won't go down. But this is money that the state has said you can use to pay for budgeted items that involve first responders and emergency management. So while it was in our budget, we can peel that out and carry it forward. It will require an action by council in order to expend those resources. We can't just carry funds forward. So if that's a direction to go, we'll put appropriate resolutions in place so that could become a reality.
Councilman Allison?
I guess I don't have too much different to say than I had the last time. I would agree that we could use the CARES funding for the first responders, depending on what the or I guess, or the balance from this year, whatever the balance is. I don't want to use the 700,000 in CARES funding if we're $1 million in the hole already in this year. I don't know how we are sitting on that, but if we're hitting our budget on the rest of things, 700,000 is in excess of that. And I have no problem using that CARES money. Again, the school bond debt thing with the permanent fund, I'm okay with that because I was on council when we had resolutions that put money in there for that purpose. The time was coming. I guess I've always considered forest receipts because I was on council prior to there being forest receipts. I always considered them kind of a windfall to the city because it allowed us to, we didn't have the permanent fund until we had those forest receipts either. We didn't have the excess money in our budget to do that. So that allowed us to build our permanent fund, which I'm happy we have. It gives us some flexibility. But specifically, some of that money was put in there specifically for paying for the bond debt when the state didn't come through. So, fortunately, we were looking in advance for that. So I'm okay with that too. The capital items that we need to go through that list and decide which ones we want to do and which ones we don't. But I'm happy to consider taking those out of the permanent fund as well. Other than that, if there's a hole in the budget, then I think it has to come from cuts. Somewhere along the way, we can't go from 10 million a couple of years ago to 11 million spending to 12 million spending. What our initial budget then was, that we're heading the wrong direction. We can't expect us to increase revenues when our public doesn't have the ability to do that. So I think that we need to look seriously at cuts beyond whatever the balance is after we take some money out for the permanent fund for the school bond and the CARES funding or whatever the balance is at the end of this year. And doing whatever it takes to do that. I understand that it takes council action to move some money around to get that accomplished, but I'm happy to consider those things. So anyway, that's my thoughts.
I'll just go through the list here, and you can always circle back if you don't have any comments or questions right now with Councilman Jim. Okay, and online, Councilman Dern.
Yeah, I've got a couple quick questions here. One statement to follow up the council member Allison's. One thing we need to consider as we're going through this week Bart down to a $10 million budget. And I think we all found we were a little bit short. We didn't fund maintenance and other things we should have been funding, and it cost us a few extra bucks in the long run. So I don't think we can afford to ask citizenry to cough up too much funding when everybody's kind of in a hole right now from COVID and stuff, but they don't want to go in and just start slashing budgets for the sake of slashing budgets. Questions I've got are, we talked about the main capital items, and there were some conversations from both Ken and Helen that said some things are in, some things are out on the capital list on the back. Get some clarification on what some of those are besides the 3 mansion grant projects. Notice we've got some yellow highlighted stuff on the copies we've got, and others. I just don't know how they broke it out, come up with 105,000 savings. So if we could I'd like to understand a little bit about the delay in restructuring of some new hires. Sounds good, but I'd like to know what that entails. I'm not sure that I agree, I'm not disagreeing at this point in time about the state lobbyist, but $50,000 isn't much of an investment to have a good ear and contact in Juneau. If for no other reason, just to keep her thumb on top of everything that's going on. So I don't know if that would be a wise cut there. And then my final was on the 2 to 5% reduction non-personnel costs. I'd kind of like to get an idea of what staff's thinking of for that. No, we went through part of that when we did our $10 million budget, and we more than once were going back and take the money out here, some money out there, move something around here. Oh, we've got excess fish tax money that came in this year, we can use it to backfill some of these holes. But I just want to make sure we're not digging ourselves a hole doing that, we're going to have to backfill later. And on that note, I think those are all the questions I have.
Okay, I can answer the one on the capital. The color coding is just to keep the departments separate. The yellow doesn't mean anything different than the white. The departments are vertical on the far left. It goes streets, clerk, parks and rec, law enforcement, PD, FD, EMS, and facilities. And the one, the 165 is the second strata, I guess, for streets. It's the 3 items, the 25, the 128, and the 12. And I think I'll let the city manager talk about the new hires.
And just back to the capital, it's just a placeholder, really, so we can adjust at any point in time how this all works. But the 165 is embedded in the budget as it is now. Everything below the first 6 items on the capital is not in the budget, and those would need to be added. Just to be clear. Restructuring of employees. Where we are now is we have some, will have and do have some opportunities to move people around. Cindy Appleton is retiring at the end of this calendar year. So the HR position will be open. We did some movement when Jason Gabrielson left. We hired Curtis Fincher, who is in a new position. I've moved Jason's position now under city manager in that department. And so there was some restructuring involved. It involved some financial savings. There's positions in the budget right now, for instance, with police department. They have asked for 4 officers with chiefs, so 5 total. They filled 3 and have chiefs, so we could fill that position or not. If we fully funded that, it has an impact in the budget. If we don't fully fund it, it's a savings. The same is true with any vacancies that we have now. I've put a hiring freeze in place until we get direction from council as to how we need to or want to proceed. So that restructuring line is really about open positions now, potential open positions in 2021, and how we choose to fill those. The state lobbyists, I know we've had a lobbyist for a very long time, but right at the moment, where the state is there's going to be no capital budget, most likely in 2021. We don't have anything on the agenda that needs help other than Ferry, and Alaska Municipal League is in a role right now where they're playing an active role in that direction. So again, looking at, $50,000 is not insignificant. I think we could take a 1-year hiatus from our lobbyist and have no impact whatsoever. I have a lot of good connections, and I feel very comfortable that if we got into a situation where we needed someone to have years there, I know a lot of people, and I'm capable of serving that role. I don't view this as anything other than a potential piece of the budget puzzle. So again, back up to you guys as to how you want to do that. 2 to 5% reduction on personnel. We do have a collective bargaining agreement that put a 2% increase into all union employees. And I am holding a 2% increase for all employees across the board as being a very critical piece of what I believe to be. We can keep our staff up and make sure that everyone is being acknowledged and recognized and compensated. So with that, a 2 to 5% reduction in every department will mean different things to different departments. It's, I don't know what that would look like, and I would ask that if that's a direction you want to go, tomorrow morning we're meeting with all department heads, and I would advise them, okay, council wants us to take a look at this. What would it look like to your department? And I can report back at the next budget meeting what that would mean and how it would impact these departments. But again, everything's on the table at this point because we've got a big hole to fill. So that I hope answers the questions, Councilman Bard, and happy to answer any other additional ones.
Well, thank you for the answers. It's food for thought.
Okay, Councilman West here. Councilman Myers absent. Councilman Schaefer.
Hi, yes, thank you. Thanks, Ted, for putting the document together, and Tim and Helen both for providing the presentation so far. I think a lot of my questions have been answered. I am definitely interested in pursuing using the CARES funding, whatever that amount comes out to be. I think would help put a pretty big dent in the gap. So I'm definitely interested in looking at how we can use those funds. Yeah, I guess as far as the capital items, I just need to know, I see the 3 that are listed here then. I guess I just need to know more about them before really saying a yay or nay on that. But I guess I'm not opposed to it if we can delay. And I did, at first when I was looking at the memo, I had the same thoughts with Councilman Bard about our state lobbyists, but I think city manager makes a good point about the next year in the state, but capital session and whatnot. So I definitely could see, I could support not having a lobbyist for next year. So yeah, those are my comments.
Hey, Councilman Miller, do you want
One question that I had, the city council has a budget of $10,050. What is that covering? Is that necessary for us? A couple $1,000 in it for the mayor and travel, that's fine. But the council should chip into this situation also, but I don't know what those costs are. The state lobbyist, I think approaching that day with the one high is, it's not like we're firing a guy on half with him, and I think he'll understand our budget. $50,000 is, it's a couple of vehicles, that's a lot of money. On page 4, where we have these capital improvement items, as I look down through these, I see some of this stuff, and I'm like, really? $7,000 for a sliding barn door? If it's COVID, then it should be covered on COVID money. Impound yard, $75,000. Just ring that thing with 40-foot Connex fans, and nobody can get through it, and it costs you the internet. So there's a bunch of items in the chamber roof. I don't know what damage is on there. I don't think the building's that old. Maybe just some repairs instead of a whole new roof. Which I don't think you'll get for $50 anyway. But yeah, there's some items on here. Now it's probably not time to go through line by line, but there's several things that I wouldn't support if I had to help me to do that. And, it's kind of in line with the rest of everybody here as far as capital projects, CARES fund. And, delaying, restructures to new hires, I mean, that's a purview of the city manager for sure. I mean, you know what you need to have, you know what you can work with, and across the state, you know, you can't do that constantly. And department heads, that's, I think all of us are concerned that if the departments cut too much to the bone, that they can't function well, but again, this is an odd year, so we're gonna have to deal with that too. So that's my question. I guess the question, could the city council $10,000, could that be cut from the budget without any harm from us? That'd be a question.
Not all 10.
Yeah, I think
And some of it is communications, like the audio or the teleconferencing in here, operating supplies, the books that I store all the minutes and all that stuff in, which are kind of spendy, but whatever, it's not a ton. And it's otherwise, it's travel, contingency line, dues and subscriptions. I think your MML membership comes out of that. And professional development, if you do a training or if anyone goes to, I mean, it can be paired.
I think we've also used that when something extraordinary happens, like when the Coast Guard was here, we hosted a dinner for them. So those kinds of things that tend to come up, that's where that pot of money is to accommodate the special situations.
Okay, well, you guys are handling that, but I would certainly support. That's it, for help, for something, don't for help. I think council can shift.
Council, I think you spoke to almost all these items. A couple of you spoke to the potential for using permanent fund towards bond debt reimbursement. I didn't really hear a consensus around that. I think a couple of you expressed some willingness to consider that. So, and Helen, yeah.
I just want to make one point. Depending on how much permanent fund you potentially might allocate towards this, let's say it's the full amount of what the state is not giving us for the school bond debt reimbursement, which is around $450,000. That could go a long way towards reinstating some of these other items, like some of the capital items, projects that are of importance, to making sure the departments, as you say, have the resources they need to function. Maybe it's a personnel thing. Maybe we don't do some of those departmental deductions. So I think one of the things that would be helpful to have some clear direction on is to maybe whether permanent fund resources would be used, could be used, and how much might be on the table so that when we come back, we're not dealing with revenue numbers, we're dealing with expense numbers. If that is at all possible, if that's something that you guys are comfortable with, or if you want to keep workshopping it, that's fine too.
Councilman Ellison.
Yeah, the whole amount for the school debt for me is $450 or whatever it is. And again, going back to the capital items, I would consider a permanent fund for some of those things, such as the Second Street grant match, those kind of things that are infrastructure for the community, that benefits the entire community. I think that's what our permanent fund is for. Don't want to spend too much of the permanent fund, but certainly consider arguing about any of these items. You know, like Councilmember Baylor, before I approve wholeheartedly your capital items list, I would want to go through at some point line by line and have a chat about them before we went ahead and did some of those things, or talk about some other options maybe that are there. But yeah, as far as permanent fund, at least the 500,000 and capital items I consider separately from the general fund budget. So I would throw this general fund at all. I would consider elsewise, unless we end up with a bunch of extra money somehow, then it wouldn't need to take from the permanent fund. But some of the things we need to do or makes good sense to do, like the Second Street project. We need to have money somewhere to pay for that. Permanent fund seems to be a good place for that.
Helen?
Just to be clear, the first 6 items on the capital list are in the budget right now. So Hippie Cove, Second Street, and Whiteshed Road. Those 3 projects are required matches in order to make them happen. It's a little over $250,000. The second 3 items are in the streets budget. It's about, as I say, $165,000. So if you took $450,000 from the permanent fund, put it in the budget, and then wanted to take a chunk of either one of those 2 items, that would go a long ways towards making it possible for us to tackle some other items on the capital list and or on the list of cuts. And we as staff could workshop those and get them back to you at the next budget session.
Just follow up on that. I'm not saying I approve of all of the things that are in the general fund budget either, if they're in the general fund, but I would pull the capital items myself. I would pull the capital items out and make them in a separate capital budget. We used to have separate capital budgets, and I guess when the state ran out of money for capital items, so did the city. So they kind of went to the buy side, but I think it still makes sense to capitalize some of those things, but takes 1/2 of the other, it's all good. It all comes out of the same pocket, so things are bad. So.
And just your point, we are moving towards having the capital budget as a separate budget. We asked department heads to put together capital budgets and present them to us, but in putting together the budget, we realized that last year's was embedded with capital items, and so it was really difficult to compare apples and oranges, if you will. So when this final budget comes out, we will have the operating budget as a standalone and the capital budget as a standalone. And then from this moment forward, we'll be able to have an apples to apples comparison when we look at next year's budget.
I think last time I asked you this question, but I'm just, there was like 300,000 that the hospital didn't actually take, right?
Correct.
So is that incorporated in this already?
Yeah, we've got them in the budget at $300,000, and that's just a placeholder. They may or may not need that, but there's a lot of uncertainty as to how this will proceed. But in the past, we've been as high as $900,000 for the hospital, so we're seeing progression downwards.
Well, we should have 300,000 left over, is what I'm saying.
We haven't paid that $300,000. So when you get the 2020 actuals, it will show a and we potentially then that will be part of this. But we're just waiting to see where we end up here. Some things might be over.
Any questions or comments by council online? Or other questions or comments? Councilman Aaron?
I don't have a problem with funding the school bond debt reimbursement, as a permanent fund. They don't feel too good about going through hostile funding, a lot of capital projects and other things with it, because we think we're in for a lot longer hard ride here for a while. And that is our only real cushion without for anything. I don't see anything coming up from the state for harbor improvements in the near future, and it's getting pretty ugly down there. I think it's real important to have a meaningful cushion of money there, and I just hate to see us burn through it too fast. But anyway, that's 2 cents. So,
Councilman Ellison?
I guess the information that I'd be interested in, which you just said you're going to provide to us, but the projected balance at the end of this year, well, you know, I know you're not going to know exactly, but get a projected balance. Some things, like you say, are going to be overspent. Some things are going to be, like, the hospital isn't going to be as much as budgeted. So somehow that's all got to come out and wash somewhere. That would be good information to have, and that would be willing to do whatever it takes. I know we're going to have to do something to make that available to be in the budget. There is a balance. I'm assuming there will be a balance. Make that available, and we'll do whatever we can for that. I'd also like a notation or something on this capital item. Which of these items are already in the general fund budget, which are not? You're going to separate this out, but
There's only 3 numbers, the 4th, 5th, and 6th.
Just those first 6.
Yes.
That's, and the rest of it is not.
Right, exactly. Those were things we did request of department heads to get their capital list, and we will start having this and be able to workshop them as well. And we can talk about some of the things on the list and let department heads speak to those.
Okay. Yeah, I think if we can get to the point where we kind of know what our balance is going to be, and if we move that forward, and if we figure out the school fund debt reimbursement, permanent fund, and seeing where we're at that point in time, what our gap is, that we're doing. I don't want to get into the position where we're saying got 10% from the budget and handing it off to you and having you do 10% from the budget without council then going through everything, because those of you who were on council a few years ago, we had a city manager that came in and we did that too, but then we get to the end of the year and all of a sudden there's items that were in the budget that were cut from the budget that are legally required to have, that we got ourselves in a bind with that. I don't want to go there. I want to be careful with that. So anything that's required, we need to make sure, like we were talking about, the $10,000 council budget. Some of that is obviously flexible, but some of it is not. We have to pay. We have to pay for our insurance. We have to do certain things. So want to be careful that we don't slash the budget, as Councilmember Guard stated. That said, I'm not interested in just slashing the budget. I would rather one with a scalpel and take what we can, use attrition where we can, just do the best job we can for the city. That's what I'm here for. So.
Councilman Bailey?
Yeah, I guess I'll support the taking money out of the permanent fund budget there for the school. But then my channel went up and we said, oh, well, then we can go the same if we do that money. No, wait a minute. The idea is not to do the other things and pay down that. There's a lot of things on this capital items that I would need more questions, or I mean, more answers to. I got a lot of questions on I'm assuming with that, like, they budget support right now without more information. That's all I've got.
Questions or comments online, council?
The harbor's not included in, or is there?
There's no enterprise funds, so we'll present those budgets, because they're based, they do zero-based budgeting and they have a balanced budget at all times. So that budget, those budgets will come from each of those departments through their commissions, and those are yet to come.
Any further questions online, council? Comments? Is this helpful, Ellen, in terms of,
Yeah, I just want to make sure everyone online is okay with the school bond debt. We'll get you a real number, but if everyone's reasonably comfortable with taking from the permanent fund to replace the school bond debt reimbursement that we're not getting from the state, we'll go ahead and implement that and put that number in for the next budget we look at.
Councilman Bennett?
And just one more comment, I appreciate the fact that you come up here and say, oh, we're gonna have to raise the tax. So I do appreciate the fact that you're trying to put this through without putting any more burden on everybody. We did that last year, so thank you.
Any other questions or comments, council or staff? We've got about 10 minutes, 13, 14 minutes left. We could take a short recess. Oh yeah, that's right. Okay, so that will adjourn the work session. And I'll call the city council public hearing that's in order. 6:45. Roll call, please.
Mayor Copeland,
Here.
Tom Baylor,
Here.